Act 1. It was a grey morning in the outskirts of London, the kind where the damp air clings to your coat and the streets never seem to dry. Somewhere past Croydon, down in a forgotten industrial yard, behind a livestock depot, the sound of shouting rang across the concrete. "Rory, stop bleedin' flirtin' and get the feed loaded." That was Fergus McAllister, a man built like a brick wall and twice as stubborn. Rory shot a quick grin over his shoulder. His father's barking didn't faze him. His attention was fixed on a young woman across the yard. "On it, Da," he said, his voice playful, before looking back at her. "Duty calls, Niamh." Niamh gave him a half smile and took a step back, her eyes drifting toward Fergus. She always found the old Scotsman a bit intimidating. He rarely said much, but his silence spoke louder than words. She turned away just as the warehouse doors opened, and out stepped Callum, Rory's older brother, hoisting two massive sacks of grain, one on each shoulder like they were pillows. Callum wasn't a man of many words, but his presence filled any space he entered. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew what he was about. Niamh's eyes lingered longer than she meant to. It had been 4 years since she first saw Callum working shirtless in the summer heat while she was helping her father deliver timber. That image of him, sweat on his skin, Stetson-style cap low over his brow, never left her mind. Back then she was just 16, and now, despite everything, the memory still made her stomach flutter. From the other side of the truck, Rory smirked. He knew that look. "Niamh O'Shea's got her eyes on you," he muttered as he walked beside his brother. Callum didn't even blink. "She's not my type." But Rory wasn't convinced. She wasn't like the other girls, not like Siobhan McKenna, wild and posh, always trying to rebel against her solicitor parents. Rory had his fun, sure, but he knew Siobhan was trouble. Niamh, though, she was the kind of girl you'd take to meet your mam. Polite, humble, with hair the colour of heather and eyes that could stop a man mid-step. But she only ever had eyes for Callum. And Callum, he kept his distance. Not out of arrogance, but because he'd been burned before. Years back, he was engaged to someone who turned out to be unfaithful every time he left town. That kind of betrayal leaves scars. She'd married a banker now, lived in the nice part of Richmond. But the moment she found out the McAllisters had hit money, thanks to some oil royalties on their inherited land, she started calling again. Callum never picked up. He didn't need to. He'd moved on, even if the wound still itched in silence. Rory, on the other hand, didn't care for old heartbreaks. He liked women who were bold, who knew what they wanted. That's why Siobhan worked for him. Well, sort of. She wasn't exactly the kind of girl you'd write home about. Still, Niamh lingered in his thoughts. There was a gentleness in her that made him feel seen. Not as a cheeky lad with a fast mouth, but as something better. She wasn't flirty, wasn't forward, but always kind. And that, in itself, was rare. As they packed the last few sacks, Fergus came stomping back, muttering about lumber for the broken fence. "Ordered the timber this morning. Niamh's bringing it down after Mass tomorrow," he said, checking the back of the lorry. "On her own?" Callum asked, without looking up. "She's all Seamus has," Fergus replied. "The lad who helps out is still in school. Can't drive yet." Callum's jaw tensed. She should be at uni, not running her Da's yard. "She graduated years ago," Rory added. "She just dresses like she hasn't." They all knew Seamus O'Shea had a drinking problem. Niamh was the one who kept the shop and yard running while he slept it off most mornings. Rory liked talking to her. She made him feel normal, like someone worth listening to. And unlike most women he met, she never flirted, not once. But she also wasn't looking at him. She was watching Callum. Always Callum. As they climbed into the truck and drove off, Fergus barked another order. "Get the fencing fixed tomorrow. Don't care if it's Sunday. Use the hands if you need to." "Aye," Rory replied. They passed the small Catholic church where they knew they'd see her tomorrow. Callum stayed quiet, always thinking, always observing. And though he never said it aloud, Rory saw it. When Niamh swept the porch, Callum glanced her way, just for a second. But it was enough. Sunday morning, the bells of St. Mary's echoed faintly through the crisp London air. Outside the chapel in South Norwood, Callum McAllister paused at the steps, offering his mother a steady arm. Moira McAllister might have stood just over 5 feet, but she was built of tougher stuff than most men. a Highland farmer's daughter through and through, and despite the silver in her hair, she was no one to be taken lightly. Callum helped her down the steps, his movements gentle but instinctive. Just then, Niamh O'Shea stepped outside the church doors behind them. She waited patiently for space to pass and gave Callum a shy smile. He lifted his cap slightly in polite greeting, meeting her eyes only for a moment. But in that fleeting glance, her heart thudded in her chest. He'd never looked at her quite like that before. "All right, Niamh," Rory called, waving from a few feet away. Niamh smiled at him, easier, lighter. Rory always made her feel at ease. "Aye, all good." "Dar said you're bringing the timber over today." "Yes, loaded it onto the flatbed last night. Thought I'd run it out before lunch." "You should stay for brunch then," Rory offered. "Mam does a cracking Sunday fry." Niamh hesitated. She caught sight of Callum again, standing beside his mother, watching her, not saying a word. "Oh, I don't think—" "Nonsense," Moira interjected, overhearing as she walked by. "You're working on a Sunday, girl. We feed people who work on Sundays." There was no room for debate. Niamh gave a small nod, caught in Moira's kindness and authority. "All right, I'll leave a note for Day." Callum's brow tightened at the mention of Seamus O'Shea, but he said nothing. As she headed down the road toward her flat, Rory looked after her. "She's a good lass," he said aloud. "Aye," Callum murmured. Their father joined them a moment later. "Before you head home, go check the herd by the river bend. Those low spots still make me nervous after the last storm." Rory groaned. "Can't we change first?" "You won't even leave the truck," Callum replied. "And if we've got to drag a cow out of the muck, then we'll look stylish doing it." Callum smirked and Rory laughed. A few minutes later, instead of turning west toward the farm, Callum headed east. "Where are you going?" Rory asked. "Niamh walks 12 blocks in heels, thought we'd give her a lift." Sure enough, they spotted her halfway down the pavement, her small steps careful, the hem of her coat catching in the breeze. Callum rolled down the passenger window. "Niamh," he said evenly. She stopped, surprised to see them. "Hop in, we'll drop you off." "I'm fine, honestly. I walk every Sunday." "You spend too much time on your feet," Callum said. Rory laughed. "Contrary to legend, he doesn't bite." Niamh blinked, confused. "Ignore him," Rory chuckled. "Just get in." She did, reluctantly, sliding into the seat beside Callum. When his hand brushed hers as he reached for the gear stick, she shifted closer to Rory. Callum noticed but said nothing. They dropped her at the back of the timber yard, where her flat sat above the shop. Rory leaned out. "See you in an hour, then." She waved silently and disappeared inside. Rory turned to his brother. "I think she's scared of you." "No, she's not. She acts like it." "Maybe." But there was no elaboration. With Callum, there never was. Down by the river, they found what they expected, a calf stuck in the silt, bawling, while its mother paced nearby. Rory sighed as they climbed out of the truck, sinking instantly into ankle-deep mud. "There goes another pair of boots." Callum didn't respond. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. By the time they returned to the house, both brothers were soaked in sludge from the waist down. Moira stood on the porch with Niamh beside her, both watching the muddy men approach. "Not in the house?" Moira barked. "Garden hose, side tap, go." "But Ma—" Rory began. "You'll survive." Moira turned to Niamh. "You'll help, won't you, dear? Can't have them washing one-handed." Before Niamh could protest, Moira was already inside. Rory grinned. "Come on, Nat, it's just mud." But when Niamh rounded the corner, she stopped dead. Callum was already shirtless, peeling off his trousers, now standing in just his dark boxers. His back, broad and carved with muscle, flexed as he turned on the tap. Her cheeks flamed red, and she spun around and fled. Rory laughed. "See? You scared her again." Callum smirked. "Sure I did." Rory raised an eyebrow. "Then why'd she run like she saw a ghost?" "Because she's not used to men like us." "You mean half-naked and covered in filth?" "No," Callum said, "just real." As they finished rinsing off, Niamh returned, looking everywhere but at them, cheeks still pink. "Hand me your clothes. I'll bag them up for the bin," she muttered. Rory handed over his first. "You're a good sport, Neve." She didn't answer, too focused on not tripping over her own embarrassment. Callum gave her a long look as she turned to go. She was shy, yes, but something told him, not weak, not at all. The scent of fried eggs and fresh bread filled the McAllister home. Moira had outdone herself again. The kitchen table was crowded with platters of sausages, black pudding, grilled tomatoes, and mugs of tea strong enough to wake the dead. Callum walked into the kitchen first, freshly showered, his hair damp and shirt sleeves rolled. Rory followed, still grumbling about cold water and ruined boots. At the table sat their father, Fergus, already tucking into his second helping. Beside him, Niamh O'Shea sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, a polite smile on her face that barely masked her discomfort. "About time," Fergus grunted without looking up. "I'm half-starved." Callum said nothing, just took his usual seat. Rory slid into the spot next to Niamh with a wink. The food made its way around the table. The clatter of plates, cups, and idle talk about fencing, feed, and market prices filled the room. Then Callum spoke. "Rory said Willie's been sniffing around you." The room went quiet. Niamh nearly dropped her fork. Fergus looked up sharply. "That lad's a menace, is it true?" Niamh took a breath. "He's asked me out a few times. I've always said no." "Good," Fergus muttered. "That one's not right in the head." Callum fixed his eyes on her. "You can say no, but if he decides he doesn't care what you want, what then?" Niamh blinked. She wasn't used to being questioned like that, especially not by him. "I can handle myself," she said, a little too defensively. Callum's brow arched. "How tall are you?" "What?" "How tall, Niamh?" 5'5", she said slowly. "How much do you weigh?" What does that—" "How much?" he pressed. She glanced at Moira, who simply sipped her tea with quiet interest. 120, Niamh said, cheeks flushing. "You're a feather, and Willie has half a foot and 50 pounds on you. So if he wants something, what's stopping him?" Niamh bristled. "I can shoot." Callum leaned back. "You have a gun?" "My da taught me. I keep one behind the counter." That caught everyone's attention. Callum raised both eyebrows. "Didn't see that coming." "I may be quiet," she said, lifting her chin, "but I'm not helpless." Moira smiled faintly. "You've got a bit of steel in you after all." Fergus nodded approvingly. "Still, let Callum take you to the range sometime. Better safe than sorry." Niamh opened her mouth to argue, but Callum was already watching her with an unreadable expression. Then Rory leaned in. "Did I hear right earlier? You've got a sister?" "Yes," Niamh said, thankful for the change in subject. "Jenny, she's moving in with us next week." "Older or younger?" "Older, just lost her job up north. She's looking to get back on her feet." Rory grinned. "Is she single?" "Rory," Moira scolded gently. "Yes, ma'am," he said with a sheepish grin. Niamh looked from Rory to Callum, who still hadn't broken eye contact. There was something new in his gaze, not sharp, not critical, something else. She didn't quite know what to make of it. After brunch, Callum stepped onto the porch and watched as Niamh loaded up the flatbed truck with timber. Her movements were efficient, practiced. She climbed into the driver's seat and waved once before pulling away. Rory came up beside him. "You're watching her. She shouldn't be doing this alone." "No," Rory agreed, "but she's tougher than we thought." "Maybe," Callum said, "but that doesn't mean she's safe." "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "If Willie comes sniffing around again, we deal with it." Rory nodded. "We could have a word." "That might just provoke him." "True," Rory sighed. "Then what's the plan?" Callum's jaw tightened. "Keep her close, quietly, no drama." Just then, a small red hatchback pulled into the yard. Siobhan McKenna stepped out, sharp dress, bright lipstick, and trouble in her heels. She was here for Rory. Callum gave his brother a long look. Rory gave a guilty shrug. "I'll deal with her. You do what you're good at." Callum headed back inside. Rory met Siobhan near the barn. He meant to end things with her properly. But 5 minutes later, the door to the supply stall was locked, and her hands were in his hair. Back at the house, Callum found himself restless. He picked up a shovel, headed to the edge of the yard, and began checking posts along the property line. Busy hands kept his mind quiet, but Neve's face kept returning. The defiant flush in her cheeks, the hint of fire beneath all that quiet. He didn't trust many people, certainly not women with secrets, but something about her stayed with him, long after she drove away. The next Sunday, the bells of St. Mary's tolled again, and the sky hung low with a promise of rain. As always, Niamh O'Shea walked alone from church, her boots clicking against the pavement. She'd only made it halfway down the block when the familiar blue Dodge pickup pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. "Get in, Niamh," Callum McAllister said. His voice was calm, but not casual. She glanced at him, then at the empty passenger seat. "I'm fine," she said. "I do this every week." "I didn't ask," Callum replied, eyes steady on hers. That pause hung between them. Something in his tone, protective, maybe even commanding, made her pulse jump. "And what's with this sudden concern?" she said, defensive to hide the nerves in her voice. "Willie's been pestering me for weeks. He hasn't done anything." "He will," Callum answered. She stared at him. "You don't know that." "I do," he said simply. "You've not lived in this town as long as I have, and Willie Murphy doesn't take no as an answer. You might be the only one not scared of him yet." The calm certainty in his voice made her skin crawl, not from him, but from the realization that maybe he was right. He nodded toward the door. "Get in, please." This time she did. The truck pulled away, and Niamh's hands twisted together in her lap. "Dar's gone into the city for more store stock," she said quietly. Callum's eyes flicked toward her, then the storefront as they passed. "No one's at home, then?" "Not till tomorrow night." Callum tapped the steering wheel once. "Come back with me. You'll stay at ours tonight." Niamh's head jerked toward him. "What?" "Just for the night," he said. "We'll bring you back before the shop opens. It's not safe here on your own." "And you decided this?" she asked, mouth dry. "Someone had to." She hesitated. The logical part of her agreed. But another part, the one that noticed how his voice warmed ever so slightly when he said her name, that part didn't know what to do. "You're not giving me much of a choice," she said softly. "I'm offering safety. You can argue, or you can accept it." She looked out the window, heart thudding. "All right." He gave a single nod. "Good. Go grab your things. I'll call my mother and let her know you're coming." Inside, Niamh scribbled a quick note for her father, packed a change of clothes, and changed into her usual work jeans and a jumper. The phone rang just as she zipped her bag. It was her cousin Siobhan, and she was crying. "He dumped me," Siobhan sobbed. "Rory just dumped me." Niamh bit her lip. "I'm sorry, Shiv. What happened?" "He said it wasn't serious. Said he doesn't want gossip around the farm. Can you talk to him for me?" Shiv, I don't think—" "Please," she begged. "You're friends. He listens to you." Before Niamh could respond, the door opened behind her. Callum stepped in, eyes sweeping the room, then landing on her. He crossed his arms. "Talk to him, Niamh. Please," Siobhan begged again in her ear. "I'll try," she whispered and hung up quickly. Callum raised an eyebrow. "Was that your cousin?" "Yes." "She wants you to fix it with Rory?" "Yes," Niamh replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Callum shook his head. "He ended it for a reason." "She's heartbroken," Niamh said. "Maybe she's not as careless as people think." "She told half the village about their nights together. That says enough." "She just wants to be loved," Niamh defended. "Then she's looking in the wrong places." Niamh narrowed her eyes. "You're quick to judge." "I know the type," he replied, "and you're not it." She flinched. "What does that mean?" "It means you're not the kind of woman who needs attention to feel important." She didn't know whether it was an insult or a compliment. Callum glanced at her small overnight bag. "That all?" "Yes." They stepped outside, locking the door behind them. As they drove back to the farm, Callum turned off the main road onto a narrow gravel path. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Riverbend. Need to check the cattle before brunch." He pulled the truck up to a wire gate and hopped out to open it. Niamh watched him, the ease in his movements, the strength in his arms. He made hard work look simple. She stepped out and said, "I could have opened that." Callum shrugged. "Old habit." They drove for 20 minutes until the river came into view. A calf stood knee-deep in thick mud, its mother circling nearby. "Oh no," Neve whispered. "We've got to help him." "We will." Callum pulled off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and reached into the toolbox for rope. "Can I help? Can you drive stick?" "Yes." He handed her the rope. "Tie this to the front bumper. When I signal, shift into reverse." He waded into the mud without hesitation. The water reached his knees, but he moved steadily, wrapping the rope carefully around the calf's neck and shoulders. Neve did as instructed. When he waved, she reversed gently. The calf popped free with a wet squelch, and the mother rushed to nudge her baby along the bank. Neve beamed. "You did it." Callum smiled faintly. "You did good." She stepped out to help unhook the rope. Then Callum's eyes caught something. The truck. It was rolling, slowly but unmistakably, down the slight slope toward the river. He dropped the rope. "No, no, no." The truck bounced once, then dipped nose first into the muddy bank. Water reached halfway up the grill. Neve stood frozen. "I forgot the brake," she whispered. Callum stood still for a moment, hands on his hips, staring at the scene. Then he took off his hat and scratched his head. "I'm so sorry," Neve said. "It's my fault. It's a truck," he said calmly. "Trucks can be hauled out." She looked up at him. "You're not mad?" He smiled just barely. "I once drove a plough straight into a slurry pit after drinking 2 ciders behind the barn. You've still got a way to go before catching up." Despite herself, she laughed. He pulled out his phone. "I'll call Rory, get the loader." As he stepped away, Neve watched the way his shoulders moved under his soaked shirt, the way his hair stuck to his forehead. He was soaked, filthy, and still completely unfazed, and somehow, in that moment, she felt safe. Like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't just looking out for her. Maybe he cared. Neve stood at the top of the bank, her boots caked in wet silt, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Below her, Callum McAllister stood thigh-deep in the river, water sloshing around the front tires of his half-submerged truck. Rory finally arrived with the farm's heavy loader, kicking up gravel as he pulled up behind her. "What the hell happened?" he shouted over the engine. "She forgot the handbrake," Callum called back, not unkindly. Rory climbed down, gave Neve a wink. "We'll call it a field test. That truck always needed a swim." She flushed and mumbled, "I'm really sorry." "Don't be," he said easily. "We've both done worse." The loader made quick work of it. With Callum's rope tied around the frame, they slowly dragged the truck back up the bank. Water poured from the front grille, leaving a muddy trail behind. Callum climbed up beside Neve once it was parked. "Let's go," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "We'll clean the inside later." Neve followed him into the cab without a word. She was still mortified, but Callum didn't tease, he didn't scold, he just drove, mud drying across his arms and shirt. After a while, she looked over at him. "You're very calm." "Years of farming," he said. "You panic, things die, so you learn to slow your blood." She studied him, this quiet man who said little but noticed everything. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "Good or bad?" "Just different." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Same goes for you." Back at the farm, Moira met them at the porch with a towel and a frown. "You two look like you've been pulled through the Thames." "Close," Callum muttered, stepping past her. "Go change, both of you. You're dripping on my floor." Neve hesitated. Moira nodded toward the stairs. "You know where the spare room is." Upstairs, Neve washed quickly, changed into her clean jumper and jeans, and tied her hair back with trembling fingers. Her mind was still replaying the look on Callum's face when he saw the truck in the river. He didn't flinch. He just fixed the problem. Downstairs, Callum and Rory had changed too. The brothers wore old work shirts and jeans, their hair still damp, their boots thudding across the wooden floor as they joined the others in the kitchen. Fergus sat at the head of the table, sipping tea, newspaper folded in his lap. Moira slid a plate in front of Neve. "Eat. You've had a morning." "Yes, Ma'am," she replied. Callum sat across from her, Rory beside her again. This time, when Callum looked at her, he didn't look away. "So," Fergus said, "we fixing that corral after this?" Aye, Callum replied. Rory groaned. More mud? Less river, more fence, Callum said, smirking slightly. Then turning back to Niamh, his tone softened. You're welcome to stay for dinner too. I don't want to impose. You're not, Moira said. It's Sunday, you helped, you stay. Fergus grunted in agreement. Callum watched her. Besides, it's safer. And we all sleep better knowing you're not out there alone. Niamh felt something shift inside her, not just gratitude, but warmth. She nodded. All right, thank you. After lunch, Callum stood from the table and motioned for Rory. Come on, that fence won't fix itself. As they walked toward the barn, Rory elbowed his brother. You've changed your tune about her. Callum gave a quiet grunt. Admit it, Rory said. You like her. Callum glanced toward the kitchen window where Niamh stood rinsing her plate, sunlight catching the auburn tones in her hair. She's not like the others. No, Rory agreed. She's not. Callum pulled on his gloves. That's what worries me. The air was cool that evening, with the scent of damp soil rising off the fields. Callum and Rory worked in silence, repairing the last of the broken fencing near the east pasture. Nail by nail, plank by plank, the corral began to take shape again. Callum wiped his brow and looked toward the house. Through the kitchen window, Niamh was visible, sleeves rolled up, helping Moira with the washing up. Her laugh, though faint from a distance, carried across the field like wind chimes. You're thinking about her again, Rory said without looking up. Callum didn't answer. Just saying, Rory added, tapping a post into place. You used to be the last person to care what someone wore to church, or whether they walked home alone. Callum straightened. She's different. She is, Rory agreed, and she's got more guts than anyone gives her credit for. Still too trusting, Callum muttered. Maybe, but she's got you looking over her shoulder now, hasn't she? Callum gave a tight nod, then turned back to his work. That night, the McAllister home was quiet. Fergus read by the fire. Moira knitted in the armchair beside him. Rory was down at the pub with a few of the hands, and Callum stood by the back door, mug of tea in hand, staring out across the darkened yard. He heard soft footsteps behind him. Couldn't sleep either. Niamh's voice came gently. Callum turned slightly. She stood in a pale blue jumper, arms folded, hair loose around her shoulders. Too much on my mind, he admitted. She joined him by the doorway, her presence warm despite the chill in the air. About the truck? No, he said quietly. About you. Niamh looked up at him, surprised. You shouldn't have to do all that alone, he continued. Run a shop, manage your father, fight off men like Willie Murphy. I've been doing it for years, she said softly. That doesn't mean you should. They stood there, the silence between them thick with unspoken thoughts. Niamh stared into the dark. You're the first person who's said that, she whispered. Callum looked at her, his voice low. You deserve better. She didn't respond right away. When she did, it came in a whisper. I don't know what I deserve anymore. I just try to get through the day. Callum turned to face her fully. Then maybe someone should help carry some of that weight. She met his eyes. It wasn't pity in his expression. It was something else, something steady. She swallowed hard. You barely know me. I've known you for 4 years, he said, long enough to see what others miss. The porch light flickered above them. Niamh shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of the moment. You should get some rest, Callum said finally. It's been a long day. She nodded. Good night, Callum. Night, Niamh. She stepped back inside, and Callum remained, watching the fields until the moon broke through the clouds and silvered the tips of the grass. Something was changing, slowly, quietly, but definitely. Monday morning dawned quietly. A low mist clung to the ground, curling along fence posts and puddles left by the week's rain. Inside the McAllister kitchen, Niamh sat with a cup of tea between her hands, dressed and ready to head back to the shop. Her bag was packed, her hair tied back. But something in her eyes looked hesitant. Moira placed a small brown paper sack on the table. Ham and mustard sandwiches, in case you don't get a chance for lunch. Niamh smiled gently. Thank you. Fergus walked in next, grumbling about weather and muddy boots, but gave her a nod that, in his own way, said she was welcome any time. Then Callum stepped in, still buttoning his collar. His eyes met hers briefly. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. "I appreciate the lift." He gave a single nod and picked up his keys. The ride was quiet, but not cold. Comfortable almost, familiar. As they neared the corner by the shop, Callum slowed the truck, scanning the road. "Something wrong?" Niamh asked. "No," he said, "just checking." She looked at him, understanding now how deeply his caution ran. He was always scanning, calculating, protecting. They stopped outside the store. Niamh opened the door, but paused, glancing at him. "Thanks. For everything. Yesterday, last night. All of it." "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "If Willie Murphy shows up again, you don't handle it alone. You ring me." She looked at him, uncertain. "I mean it," he said. "No pride. No stubbornness. Just pick up the phone." She nodded slowly. "All right." He relaxed a little, gave her a small smile. "Good." She stepped out, closed the door, and turned back toward the entrance. Before unlocking it, she looked once more over her shoulder. Callum was still watching. That afternoon, Niamh was behind the counter when the bell above the shop door jingled. She looked up, expecting a neighbor or familiar face, but her stomach dropped. It was Willie Murphy. He sauntered in with his usual swagger, aviator sunglasses pushed up onto his forehead, leather jacket half-zipped. "Niamh," he said smoothly, "you've been hard to find." She kept her face calm. "Good afternoon, Willie. Can I help you?" He leaned against the counter, too close. "Thought I'd swing by. Chat a bit. Maybe you'll finally let me take you for a drink." "I've said no, Willie, several times." He grinned. "Aye, you have. But I figured maybe you just needed some persistence." Niamh stiffened. "No means no." His smile faded slightly. There was an edge in his voice now. "You always so formal, or is it just with me?" "I'm working," she said. "Please leave." Willie laughed once, then stepped back. "I'll be around," he said. "Don't act like I'm the bad guy for liking you." He turned and walked out, but not before dragging his fingers across the display of chocolate bars, knocking several onto the floor. The bell jingled again, and the door swung shut behind him. Niamh let out the breath she'd been holding. An hour later, Callum's truck pulled up out front. He walked in, immediately noticing her pale face and clenched jaw. "What happened?" he asked. Niamh hesitated. "Don't lie," Callum said, voice firm. "I'll know." She sighed. Willie came by. Callum's jaw tightened. "He didn't touch me. Just pushed boundaries." Callum said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly, "Next time, you don't wait to tell me." "I wasn't sure if you'd—" "Niamh," he interrupted, stepping closer. "I'm not doing this halfway. If I say I'll protect you, I mean it." Their eyes locked. "All right," she said softly. Outside, the sky had begun to darken again. The clouds rolled low, and the wind picked up through the streets of South Norwood. And standing there behind the counter, with Callum watching over her, Niamh felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, but safety, real, solid safety. And that, for her, was new. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the clouds lingered. Callum McAllister stood at the edge of the cattle field, boot soles sinking slightly into the soft earth. His eyes scanned the pasture, but his mind wasn't on the livestock. It was on the way Niamh had looked yesterday. Calm on the outside, wrecked underneath. He hadn't said it out loud, not to Rory, not even to himself. But something about her had settled under his skin, and it wasn't just protection anymore. Back at the house, Moira leaned across the kitchen table toward her husband. "Did you hear what Rory said about that Murphy boy?" Fergus looked up from his paper. "I did. You think he'll listen?" "Callum?" Fergus folded the page. "He's already made up his mind." Moira sipped her tea. "She's got a gentle heart, that girl. But there's fire in her, too." Fergus gave a small grunt. "Reminds me of someone I married." Moira raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Later that day, at the shop, Niamh was stacking flour sacks near the back shelves when the bell rang again. She braced herself, but it wasn't Willie this time. It was Jenny. Her older sister stood in the doorway, suitcase in one hand, bright red coat draped over the other. Her smile was instant and unguarded. Neve! Neve rushed forward, wrapping her in a hug. You made it, she said. Jenny laughed. I told you I would. It had been almost a year since they'd seen each other, and Jenny looked the same. Sharp cheekbones, perfect makeup, confident posture. She always walked like she had somewhere more important to be. Neve, by contrast, felt small and plain next to her. But the hug lingered, and it felt good. That night, Callum heard the news from Rory over dinner. Her sisters moved in, Rory said between bites. Real looker, apparently. Walked into the shop like she owned the place. Doesn't surprise me, Callum muttered. Rory nudged his brother. Might be worth saying hello. She might be more your type. Bold, polished, good with a bit of gossip. Callum shot him a look. I'm not interested in bold. Rory grinned. Number, you're interested in the one hiding behind the till. Callum didn't respond. Because Rory wasn't wrong. The next day, Callum drove into town early. He told himself it was to pick up supplies, tools, nails, a few bags of cement. But somehow he parked in front of the shop. Just to check in, just to see her. When he stepped inside, it was Jenny behind the counter. She turned, flashing a practiced smile. Hello there, she said brightly. Can I help you? Callum gave a polite nod. Looking for Neve. She's just in the storeroom. You're Callum, right? Aye. Jenny leaned on the counter slightly. She told me about you. Callum raised an eyebrow. Did she now? Jenny's smile curved. Only good things. Before he could reply, Neve emerged from the back, wiping her hands on her apron. Oh, she said, surprised. You didn't say you were coming. I was in the area, Callum replied. Jenny watched the two of them carefully. Neve moved around the counter. Everything all right? He nodded once, just checking in, making sure there's been no more trouble. Number quiet since Sunday. They stood awkwardly in the middle of the shop, the unspoken tension between them thickening. Jenny stepped aside. I'll go check stock. She disappeared into the back, and for a moment the air cleared. Callum looked at her. You sure you're all right? I am, Neve said, then hesitated. Thank you for coming by. He gave a small nod. You'd do the same. She smiled, small, soft, real. It lingered with him for the rest of the day. Back at the farm, Rory caught him staring out the window, coffee in hand. Still thinking about her? Callum didn't answer at first. Then quietly, aye. Rory leaned against the doorframe. You're falling for her, aren't you? Callum exhaled. I don't know what to call it yet. But it's there. Callum nodded once. And what are you going to do about it? Rory asked. Callum stared into the fields. Not mess it up, he said. Neve sat at the dining table that evening, sipping tea while Jenny unpacked in the next room. The sound of coat hangers scraping along a wardrobe rail filled the silence between them. She likes you, Jenny called out casually. Neve blinked. Who? Callum. Neve nearly choked. He doesn't. He's just protective. Jenny laughed softly. He doesn't look at other people the way he looks at you. Neve stirred her tea, pretending not to smile. You should see the way his voice changes when you walk into the room, Jenny added. It dips lower, slows down. Like he can't quite keep up with himself. I think you're imagining it, Neve said, trying to hide her blush. No, Jenny replied. I think you're just not used to being looked at like that. Neve didn't reply. Because her sister was right. She wasn't used to being noticed. She wasn't used to mattering. Not like this. The next morning, Neve opened the shop early. Jenny was still asleep upstairs, and the street was quiet. Just the hum of a delivery lorry reversing across the lane. Then the bell jingled. She looked up to find Callum at the door. He didn't speak right away. He held a paper bag in one hand. Bacon rolls, he said. She blinked. What? From Millie's. Still warm. You brought breakfast? He gave a small shrug. Figured you skipped it again. She stared at him, confused. Why are you being so kind? He paused, then set the bag on the counter. Because I want to. Neve looked down at the grease-spotted paper. The smell of fresh rolls filled the space between them. "I'm not used to this," she admitted. Callum nodded slowly. "That's all right. I'm not used to doing it." They stood there, suspended in the quiet. Then Jenny's voice echoed down the stairs. "Smells like bacon." Callum smiled faintly. "I'll leave you two to it." He turned to go, but before he could open the door, Niamh spoke. "Callum." He paused. "Thank you, really." He looked over his shoulder. "It's not charity, it's care." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing at all. Later that day, while restocking tins on the high shelves, Niamh stood on a wobbly step stool. She reached too far and slipped. Just as she felt herself fall, strong arms caught her from behind. Her heart thudded. It wasn't Willie, it wasn't a stranger, it was Callum. He steadied her gently, hands firm around her waist. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, breathless. "You need to stop doing things alone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not used to help," she replied. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm staying." Niamh's breath hitched. He wasn't flirting. He wasn't teasing. He was telling her something real. She stepped back, grounding herself again. "I should get back to the shelf," she said, her voice shaky. Callum gave her a long look, then nodded. "I'll be nearby." And he was. That evening, Niamh found a small note in the bottom of the breakfast bag he'd brought. It was written in careful, blocky handwriting. "If anything happens, even the smallest thing, ring me, no questions, just say the word." "See," she folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. Not for safety, but because it mattered. Because he did. The week passed slowly. Rain came and went. The roads were slick, the skies grey, and the McAllister farm settled into its usual rhythm. But inside Callum, something was shifting. He found himself thinking about Niamh in the quiet moments, while mucking out the stables, while loading feed, while standing at the fence watching the cattle graze. It wasn't just concern anymore, it wasn't just duty. It was something deeper, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. One morning, while checking the fencing near the northern boundary, Callum spotted a familiar figure walking up the path. Rory. "Got a minute?" Rory called. Callum nodded. "Always." Rory pulled a folded envelope from his back pocket. "It's from Willie, left it at the shop." Callum took it slowly, opened it and read the scrawled note. "Stay out of what's not yours, she'll come around, she always does. W." He folded the note in half, then into quarters. His jaw clenched, but his hands were steady. "She see it?" Callum asked. Rory shook his head. "Jenny found it first, burned it before Niamh saw." Callum nodded once. "Good." "What do we do?" Rory asked. Callum looked out at the fields. The wind shifted slightly, brushing through the tall grass like a warning. "We don't wait," he said. "We finish this." Back in town, Niamh was sweeping the shop floor when the bell rang again. She froze, then slowly turned. It wasn't Willie, it was Callum. He walked in, eyes searching hers. "We need to talk," he said. She set the broom aside. "About what?" He held up the folded note. She read the first line and went pale. "He's threatening you," she whispered. Callum's voice was low. "He's escalating, and we can't ignore it." "I didn't want to drag you into this," she said. "You didn't. I stepped in." Niamh swallowed hard. "I'm scared." He moved closer. "You don't have to be. Not with me." Her eyes filled with tears she hadn't expected. She blinked fast. "People like him don't stop," she said. "I know," Callum replied. "That's why we don't let him choose the terms." "Then what do we do?" "We set boundaries, legal ones if we have to, and if that doesn't work—" "What?" Callum's voice dropped. "Then I handle it my way." She stared at him, uncertain. "I'm not violent, Niamh," he said, "but I will not let anyone make you feel unsafe." She looked down, then stepped forward and placed her hand on his chest. His heart was beating fast, not with fear, but with something more powerful. She looked up. "Thank you." Callum didn't move. "I'll check on you every day, until this stops. No arguments." She nodded. "Okay." As he turned to leave, she called out softly, "Callum." He turned. She hesitated. "Why are you doing this for me?" His eyes were steady. Because when I look at you, I see something I don't want to lose. Neve stood still long after the door closed behind him. She wasn't used to being someone's priority, but for the first time, she believed she might be. That night, Neve couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her small room above the shop, staring at the ceiling, listening to the occasional creak of pipes and distant wind brushing against the glass. Callum's words echoed in her head. I see something I don't want to lose. She turned over, clutching her pillow. It had been so long since someone had said something like that and meant it. So long since anyone had looked at her like she was more than just a girl, holding everything together with tape and thread. Downstairs, the front door creaked. She sat up sharply. Footsteps, slow, heavy. She slipped out of bed, bare feet hitting the floor. Her heart raced. She grabbed the small wooden bat she kept tucked beside the dresser and crept toward the stairs. A shadow moved near the entrance. Then, a knock. Firm, intentional, she held her breath. Callum, she whispered. It's me. His voice came through, low but urgent. She raced down and opened the door. He stood there, soaked from the rain, jacket clinging to his frame. What's wrong? She asked. Murphy's been drinking, Callum said. Rory saw him near the railway bridge. He was shouting your name. Neve felt a chill crawl across her skin. He's not near here, is he? Number. But I don't want to take chances. Pack a bag. You're staying with us. I can't just leave. You can, he said, and you will. She looked up at him, the way the water ran down his face, the tension in his shoulders, the fury hiding behind his calm. She nodded. I'll be quick. 10 minutes later, they were in his truck, driving through the winding roads toward the farm. Silence filled the cab, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of understanding. When they reached the house, Moira was waiting in her robe, arms crossed but eyes full of concern. Upstairs, guest room's ready. I put out fresh towels. Neve turned to Callum. Thank you, she said softly, for coming. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, You matter, Neve. She blinked back tears. I never thought anyone would fight for me like this. I'll fight, he said, every damn time. She stepped inside, and for the first time in weeks, she felt safe enough to breathe. Callum stood at the door long after it closed, staring into the rain. Upstairs, Neve leaned against the wall, hand pressed to her chest. The thunder outside was soft now, but something inside her was thundering louder than ever. She was falling, and she wasn't afraid. The next morning broke with a golden light across the hills. For the first time in weeks, Neve had slept through the night. No creaks, no knocks, no shadows at the door, just the soft rustle of sheets and the comfort of knowing someone else was listening. Just in case. She came downstairs to the smell of fresh bread and bacon. Moira was at the stove, her hair still pinned up from the night before. Morning, love, she said. Hungry? Neve smiled. Starving. Callum was already at the table, reading the paper. He looked up and their eyes met. Sleep all right? He asked. She nodded. Better than I have in a long time. Moira slid a plate in front of her. Eat up. You've got a shop to run, and I'll not have you fainting by lunchtime. After breakfast, Callum pulled on his coat and opened the front door. I'll walk you in. You don't have to, Neve said gently. I know, but I want to. The road was still wet from the night's rain. The trees shook droplets onto the ground with every gust of wind. They walked in silence for a few minutes. Then Neve spoke. Why are you doing this? He didn't answer right away. Then softly, because I've known too many people who didn't get help until it was too late. She looked at him. I'm not helpless, you know. I know, he said, but even the strong deserve backup. That silenced her. Back at the shop, Jenny was already inside, flipping the sign to open. Morning, lovebirds, she called with a smirk. Neve blushed. Callum didn't react. Everything quiet? He asked. Quiet as a nun in confession, Jenny replied. Neve shook her head. You're impossible. Callum touched her arm lightly. I'll check back later. She nodded. As the door closed behind him, Jenny crossed her arms. He's in love with you. Neve froze. Jenny. No point denying it. He looks at you like he'd walk through fire to keep you safe. Neve's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Jenny softened. Maybe you don't have to be ready. Maybe you just have to be willing. That afternoon, Willie Murphy returned. He didn't enter the shop. He stood across the road, watching. Niamh saw him through the glass, the slouched stance, the cigarette, the smirk. But this time she didn't panic. She reached into the drawer, pulled out her phone and dialed Callum. "He's here," she said quietly. "Stay inside," Callum replied. "I'm on my way." Less than 10 minutes later, Callum pulled up in the truck, stepped out, and walked across the road. The way he moved, steady, deliberate, made the air change. Willie saw him and stood straighter. Callum didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He stood inches away and said something no one else could hear. Willie didn't reply. He just looked down, flicked his cigarette, and walked away. Callum stood there until Willie disappeared around the corner. Then he came inside. Niamh was behind the counter, fists clenched. "He won't be back," Callum said. "What did you say to him?" Callum met her eyes. "I told him if he came near you again, there wouldn't be a next time. And I meant it." Niamh stepped out from behind the counter. "I don't know what this is between us," she said, "but I want to figure it out." His voice was quiet. "So do I." And there, between shelves of soup tins and biscuit boxes, they stood together. Not as rescuer and rescued, but as something new, something real, something worth holding on to. The days that followed passed in quiet rhythm. Willie Murphy was gone. No sightings, no whispers, no anonymous notes shoved through the door. Just stillness. For the first time in years, Niamh could walk through her own shop without looking over her shoulder. But it wasn't just the threat that had faded, it was the ache of doing everything alone. Because now she wasn't. Callum came by most mornings, sometimes with a bag of rolls, sometimes just a quiet nod and a cup of tea placed on the counter. Jenny noticed. She always noticed. But she said less and less, because she knew. One evening, Callum invited them both to dinner at the farm. Jenny, ever the peacock, wore a red scarf and heels unsuited for the gravel path. Moira was unfazed. "I've fed worse in worse," she said, chuckling as she passed Jenny a second helping of roast lamb. Rory, for his part, tried very hard not to flirt, and failed. "Can't say we get many like you round here," he told Jenny. "Good," she replied. "I'd hate to compete." Callum and Niamh sat across from each other. They didn't say much during the meal, but their eyes met often. Later, as the dishes were cleared and the fire crackled in the hearth, Callum walked Niamh outside. The sky was clear, stars sharp and cold above the fields. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, looking up. "I used to think this would be it," he said. "Farm, fields, fence work, nothing else." "And now?" she asked. He turned toward her. "Now I think I was just waiting." "For what?" He paused. "For someone who'd make it all mean more." The words settled between them like snow. Niamh stepped closer. "I don't know where this is going," she whispered. "You don't have to," Callum said. "You just have to not run from it." She looked up at him, eyes wide, uncertain. "I've never been someone's person." "You are now," he said quietly. "If you want to be." He didn't kiss her. He didn't reach out. He just waited. And in that stillness, she stepped forward and placed her hand in his. That was enough. The night stretched out around them, silent, strong, certain. Spring came slowly. The trees along the lane turned a deeper green, and the earth warmed beneath the boots of early risers. At the McAllister farm, calves were being born, fence posts replaced, and the days stretched longer. But the biggest change wasn't in the land. It was in the quiet way Niamh and Callum grew toward each other, like ivy finding stone, strong and steady. They didn't speak of love, not yet. But it pulsed in every glance, every cup of tea poured without asking, every hand brushed while passing tools in the field. One morning, Niamh stood beside Callum near the edge of the east pasture, watching him coax a calf from its nervous mother. She smiled as he knelt in the straw, gentle and firm, whispering things to the animal that made it trust him instantly. "You're good with the scared ones," she said quietly. He looked up, wiping his hands on his trousers. "I was one once." She blinked. "You?" Callum stood slowly. "After Mum died, I didn't talk for almost a year." Fergus thought I'd gone mute. Moira didn't push, just kept making me toast and waiting. What changed? Neve asked. One day I saw Rory fall off a roof. I screamed so loud I startled a crow out of a tree. She laughed. Callum smiled faintly. Didn't shut up for weeks after that. Neve looked at him, a new tenderness forming behind her eyes. I'm glad you found your voice. He tilted his head. I'm glad you came here. That night, Jenny came home with a decision. She sat Neve down at the kitchen table, opened her laptop, and turned the screen toward her. I'm moving to Brighton. Neve blinked. What? Jenny smiled. I need a change, something by the sea. And maybe a fresh start of my own. But the shop? I'll help you run it from there if you want. Or maybe this is your sign to stop carrying it all alone. Neve stared at her sister, stunned. You're not angry? Jenny shook her head. Number, you've always held the line. Now it's your turn to let something hold you. She reached across the table and took Neve's hand. You deserve a life that fills you, not just one you survive. The words sank in and stayed. The next day, Neve walked with Callum to the far edge of the McAllister fields. The wind was brisk, the sky wide open. I want to leave the shop, she said. Callum turned toward her, surprised. Not forever. Just sell it. Or let someone else run it. You sure? She nodded. I've spent so long fighting to stay afloat, I forgot I could swim. Callum smiled. And what do you want to swim toward? She reached for his hand. You. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw everything he'd been waiting for. Without a word, he kissed her. It was slow, solid, like building something brick by brick. And in that kiss was a promise, not of perfection, but of peace. Summer rolled in gently, the fields glowed gold, children played along the hedgerows, and the village moved at its own quiet pace. The shop had new owners now, a young couple from Bristol, eager and wide-eyed. Neve had helped them settle in, showed them the quirks of the old shelves and which suppliers always ran late. Then she handed them the keys and walked away. For the first time in years, she wasn't tethered to a place out of duty. She was free to choose, and she chose the farm, not because it was easier, but because it was honest. Callum built a small studio near the barn, space for her to paint again, or write, or simply sit with a cup of tea and watch the rain roll in. Jenny visited often, sending postcards from Brighton and voice notes filled with sea breeze and market gossip. Fergus still grumbled every morning, but he smiled more now. Moira kept her knitting basket beside the fireplace and insisted on Sunday roasts, even when it was just the four of them. And Rory found someone too, a schoolteacher with a sharp tongue and a kind heart. The house, once filled only with quiet and routine, now pulsed with life again. One evening, Callum found Neve at the edge of the field, where the sky burned orange and pink above the trees. He wrapped an arm around her waist. You all right? He asked. She leaned into him, more than all right. They stood like that for a while, saying nothing, because they didn't need to. Later, as the stars appeared, Callum turned to her. I never thought I'd love again, he said softly. Neve smiled. Neither did I. But you walked in, he continued, with your quiet strength and your heavy bags and your cracked voice, and you reminded me that life doesn't end after hurt. It just begins differently. She kissed his cheek. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me. I always did, he replied. And together they walked back toward the house, two souls stitched slowly together, not by fireworks or grand declarations, but by the simple, steady promise of staying, day after day, step by step, hand in hand.